If you're having trouble creating the marketing for your game's features for your Steam store page, then here's 4 easy steps showing you exactly what to do. So my goal in this video is to show you how to market your game's features so that players will want to wishlist and buy your game. So quickly, I just want to talk about how features actually do sell games, right? Because remember, gamers aren't spending money on your talent, your ideas, your hard work. They're not even spending money on your game, right? What they're really spending money on is the experience, the fun, the entertainment that your game offers. And this is because, gamers, and like all of us, are self-interested, right? And so it's our job to figure out a way to appeal to, those gamers' self-interest. And the best way to appeal to their self-interest is to showcase your game's features in a way, that will show a player how much entertainment they'll get out of your game. But if your game looks boring and it sounds boring, then your game won't appeal to a gamer's self-interest. So let's work on that right now. Let's make your, your game's features sound and look entertaining so that when a player, lands on your Steam store page, they'll, check out your features and they'll be motivated to buy and wishlist your game. So here's exactly what to do. So here's step 1. Break your game down into 5 to 7 tasks the player will do in your game. So to make your game's features entertaining and appeal to, gamers' self-interest, then we have to answer the question, what's in it for me? So let's make it easy for players to understand exactly, what's in it for me. So to do this, let's simplify your game by breaking it down into, bite-sized chunks. And so what I want you to do in this step is to clearly define 5 to 7, tasks the player will perform when they're playing your game. All right, to help you break down your game into these little small bite-sized chunks, I want you to answer the question, what does the player do? This might sound kind of easy or kind of obvious, but it's really important to organize your game into like 5 or 7, tasks, because then later I'll show you how to turn those tasks into, full-fledged features that are entertaining and fun and are attention-grabbing. So in this step, don't go into too much detail. Just right now, I want you to figure out 5 to 7 tasks a player will do in your game. So think big picture. And so for example, say I'm making a dungeon crawler, shopkeeper game. So what will the player do, right? Well, I came up with 5 distinct, tasks the player will get to do in that game. So 1 is slay monsters, 2, loot dungeons, 3, sell the loot to customers, 4, inventory management, and 5, shop customization, right? So 5 distinct tasks that the player will do. Okay, let's stop there. Let's move on to step 2. And I promise all of this will come together. So here's step 2. How does each task work? Remember, if you want a player to buy and wishlist your game, we have to make it easy and simple for them to understand what's in it for me. And we have to figure out a way to market our game so the game doesn't sound generic and, offers something new and exciting to a player that they haven't seen before. So let's keep going and let's, take each of those 5 to 7 tasks and let's break them down into, even smaller chunks. And to help you do that, I want you to answer this question. How does this task work? So for example, in my, dungeon crawler shopkeeper game, one of the tasks was, slaying monsters. So how does that work? Well, the player gets to crawl through the dungeon and they have to fight, various monsters. So now do the same thing with your 5 to 7 tasks and answer the question, how does this task work? Okay, let's move on to step 3, and that is what action will the player take? So the idea with this step is to, put the focus on the player and what they will get to do when they play your game, right? When they actually do those tasks. Again, this is important because if you can clearly show and tell what the player gets to do, then it's easier for them to imagine themselves having fun and being entertained. So in this step, I want you to answer the question, what action will the player take for this task? So for example, again, in my, dungeon crawler shopkeeper game, so the task was, slaying monsters. So how it worked was the player crawls through a dungeon and has, to fight various enemies. And the player action is hack and slash monsters with their sword for melee attacks. They use a dash to avoid monsters and environmental, dangers. And then they get to use magic spells, for range attacks. So you see what I mean? We're breaking down the tasks into what they get to do and then specific actions the player gets to do. And again, this is really important because you don't want to leave anything to the imagination. You don't want them to be guessing what your game is, because if there's any confusion, they're not going to understand what's going on in your game. Okay, let's move on to step 4, and that is show the player the result of their action using an animated GIF or movie. Okay, so far we've been working on the description of your game's features, right? So basically this is going to be the description. But now what you need to do is to tie it all together and then show the player what result they'll get from each feature, because you need both. You need to tell and then you need to show. And again, the reason you're doing all of this work is to make it easier for the player to understand, what's in it for me. Because the moment the player has to think and is confused in any way about, what's going on, then they'll be bored and their interest is gone, right? So by showing a player, the results of each of your features, then they'll instantly know what's going on. So let me show you what I mean. Let's go back to, my dungeon crawler shopkeeper example. So again, my task is slay monsters. How it works is the player crawls through a dungeon and has to, fight various enemies. And then the player action again is hack and slash and then there's dash, and then they get to use magic, right? So 3 distinct actions. So now to tie it all together, I would have an animated GIF or movie showing how each of those actions work. So then I would have an animation showing off, how the hack and slash works. Then another animation showing how, the dash works, and then another animation showing how the magic works. And then, you have the animation, and underneath it, then you have that short description that you worked on, in step 2 and 3. Basically, again, you're tying, showing and telling together, because that way it will make it easier for the, player to understand what's going on. Okay, so let me show you a real example in action in using the indie game Moonlighter, right? So if you go to their Steam page and, go to their short description, the, about this game section, you'll see that there's 5 distinct tasks, right? Maybe 6, but I got 5. So the first task is shopkeep. The second task is fight. The third task is meet villagers. The fourth task is craft. And the fifth task is loot dungeons. And so for each task, there's a description on how it works and what actions the player gets to take. And then, of course, there's an animation showing off that task, basically in action, right? So why does this simple technique work? Well, the reason why this works is because the whole point of having fun and, being entertained is to shut your brain off, right? But if your player has to think and has to figure out what's going on in your game, and if there's any confusion, then it's hard for them to, be entertained because they can't shut their brain off. And then, they're bored and their interest is gone. But here's the big takeaway. If you do all the work for them and you make it easy for them to understand, what's in it for me, then you can hold their interest, their attention a little bit longer. And that's why it's so important to do all this work, is because you want to make it easy for the player to shut off their brain and, keep them interested by checking out all your features, because the longer they stay on your Steam store page or your itch.io page, the more likely they'll be motivated to wishlist and buy your game. Okay, so here's your challenge right now. Make your features more entertaining. This will only take about 10 minutes. So open up a Google document. Now think of one task a player will take in your game. So just one task. We don't have to do all 5 today. I just want you to get the ball rolling and start thinking about how to do this. So take one task the player is going to do in your game. And this is essentially your feature, right? We're building your feature. Okay, so now that you got your one task, now explain how that task works, right? Okay, good. But now break it down even further and now think about the actions the player will take in order for this, task to work. So once you figure all this out, you now basically have a description for your basically your feature, right? Now the last step is to record a clip of your game that shows the player, taking these actions to make that task work. And if you're having trouble designing your Steam page so that way, you grow your wish list, then click the description below and then I'll show you how I can help you out. Okay, great job. I hope you took some action to help you get closer to finding players and growing your audience, using your game's features. Okay, my name is Dariusz. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening and good luck with game dev. Talk to you later. Bye.